I walked into Cartier that Tuesday afternoon, my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and defiance I hadn't felt in months. The familiar scent of luxury and the soft lighting felt like coming home after being away far too long. "Mrs. Johnson. How wonderful to see you again." The sales associate smiled warmly as she approached. "It's been far too long since your last visit." I nodded, feeling the weight of the decision I'd finally made after months of living under constant family scrutiny. "I'd like to see that diamond necklace we discussed before my husband passed away." As she brought out the stunning piece, the diamonds catching the light like captured stars, I examined it with the appreciation it deserved. This wasn't just jewelry. This was freedom in physical form. "Mom, what are you doing here?" The familiar voice made me turn. Jessica stood in the boutique doorway, her face showing complete shock at seeing me in my element again. My daughter-in-law's eyes darted between me and the expensive necklace in my hands, her expression a mixture of surprise and something that looked like panic. I turned to face her, the necklace still in my hands, and said with a calm I hadn't felt in years, "I'm finally living like the woman I am." You see, that moment at Cartier wasn't just about buying jewelry. It was about breaking free from months of guilt, manipulation, and living small to make others comfortable with my choices. It was about reclaiming my right to enjoy the life my late husband and I built together. Let me tell you how I got to that moment of freedom, and why it took me over 7 decades to find the courage to spend my own money without asking anyone's permission. Before we continue, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and subscribe for more stories like mine. My name is Eleanor Johnson. I'm 72 years old, and I live in a beautiful home in Scottsdale, Arizona. Let me tell you about the life that led me to that powerful moment at Cartier. My late husband Robert built a successful technology consulting business from our garage back in the early 1980s. We worked side by side for decades, and when he sold the company in 2018, we received over $18 million. After taxes and careful investments, I inherited approximately $15 million, plus our stunning desert home and several rental properties. Robert passed away in early 2019, and his final words to me were something I'll never forget. "Live beautifully, my love. Enjoy everything we built together. But grief has a way of making you vulnerable to other people's opinions about how you should live your life." My family has always known about our financial success. This was never hidden from them. My son Michael grew up surrounded by the benefits of our wealth. Private schools, family vacations to Europe, a college education without student loans. He experienced every advantage our hard work could provide. When Michael married Jessica 6 years ago, she was absolutely thrilled to join what she called a successful family. They both knew about the inheritance, the investment portfolio, our real estate holdings. Jessica would often comment about how blessed they were to be part of such financial security. At first, their concern for my well-being seemed genuinely loving and protective. "Mom, are you sure you need that expensive handbag?" Jessica would ask with what appeared to be sweet concern. "Maybe something more practical would be better for someone in your position." Michael would nod along supportively. "Jessica's just looking out for your best interests, Mom." I started second-guessing purchases I'd made, confidently for decades. Maybe they're right, I'd think. Maybe I should be more conservative with my spending now that I'm alone. After Robert's funeral, these gentle suggestions became more frequent and pointed. "Mom, Dad worked incredibly hard for this money," Jessica would say during family dinners. "Shouldn't we be more focused on preserving it for the grandchildren's future? People around town are watching how the wealthy widow behaves," she'd add with apparent concern. "You don't want to appear frivolous or irresponsible." Each seemingly caring comment chipped away at my confidence to enjoy the beautiful life Robert and I had spent 4 decades building together. I began questioning every desire, every small luxury, every moment of joy I might find in the success we'd earned together. About 6 months after Robert's death, Jessica suggested we begin having regular family financial discussions. She presented this idea with such apparent thoughtfulness during a Sunday dinner. "Just to make sure everyone's on the same page about spending decisions," she explained with a concerned smile. "We want to support you in making wise choices during this difficult time." But these weren't discussions at all. They were interventions disguised as family meetings. Every personal purchase I made became a topic for family debate and analysis. The first major incident happened when I bought a beautiful winter coat from Nordstrom. It was a stunning designer piece that cost $3,000, something I would have purchased without a second thought when Robert was alive. Jessica's response was swift and cutting. "Mom, that's equivalent to 3 months of groceries for a struggling family. Do you really need something so extravagant?" She continued with practiced concern. "What would Dad think about you spending his legacy on unnecessary clothes? He was always so mindful about money." Michael immediately chimed in with his usual enabling response. "Maybe she has a point about being more mindful with purchases, Mom. We just want what's best for you." I felt such shame standing there, holding the beautiful coat I'd been excited to wear. The next day, I returned it to the store, feeling like a scolded child, rather than a successful woman with the means to buy whatever brought me joy. The jewelry incident was even worse. For my 72nd birthday, I wanted to treat myself to an elegant bracelet, a gift from me to me, something Robert would have absolutely encouraged. The piece cost $8,000, and I thought it was perfect. Somehow Jessica discovered my plans and called what she termed an emergency family meeting. "This kind of spending is getting completely out of control," she announced to Michael and me, as if I weren't capable of managing my own finances. "We need to establish some reasonable boundaries. The grandchildren's college funds could benefit from that money instead of adding to an already extensive jewelry collection," she continued, making my desire for something beautiful sound selfish and wasteful. I sat there in my own living room, feeling obligated to defend my right to spend my own money on something that brought me happiness. The worst part was how Jessica made it sound like she was protecting the family's future from my poor judgment. The social pressure tactics became increasingly sophisticated. Jessica began involving extended family members, presenting herself as the concerned daughter-in-law trying to manage an elderly woman's questionable decisions. "We're all worried about Eleanor's judgment lately," she'd confide to my sister-in-law Margaret during family gatherings. "The spending has become quite concerning." At social events, Jessica would make pointed comments loud enough for others to hear. "Grandma's been shopping again. We really need to keep an eye on her spending habits." The message to everyone around us was clear. I was being irresponsible, selfish, and inappropriate for my age. I was a wealthy widow who had lost perspective and needed monitoring. Gradually, I stopped visiting the luxury boutiques where Robert and I had shopped together for decades. I avoided the stores where sales associates knew me by name and had always treated me with respect and appreciation. Instead, I found myself shopping at discount retailers, trying to prove to my family that I was being sensible and age-appropriate. I needed their approval more than I needed the things that brought me joy. My monthly personal spending dropped dramatically. Where I had once spent freely on clothes, jewelry, spa treatments, and experiences, I began restricting myself to only the most necessary purchases. Even those small indulgences became sources of family intervention and shame. $100 skincare treatment would prompt concerned phone calls. A nice dinner at an upscale restaurant would result in gentle lectures about fiscal responsibility. I was living like someone with limited means while sitting on over $15 million, afraid to enjoy my own success because my family had convinced me that my happiness was somehow theft from their future inheritance. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening in November, almost a year after Robert's passing. Jessica had organized what she called a family financial intervention, though she presented it to me as a loving family meeting to discuss my well-being. When I arrived at Michael and Jessica's house, I was surprised to find not just them, but also my sister-in-law Margaret and Jessica's mother Patricia waiting in their formal living room. The atmosphere felt heavy and orchestrated, like I was walking into an ambush rather than a family discussion. "Eleanor, please sit down," Jessica began with practiced concern. "We're all here because we love you and we're genuinely worried about your spending habits and decision-making since Dad passed away." Michael nodded along nervously. "Mom, we think that at your age you might benefit from some guidance to protect yourself and preserve what Dad worked so hard to build." I felt my stomach drop. They were talking about me as if I were incompetent. as if my decades of successfully managing our household finances and business decisions meant nothing. Jessica pulled out a manila folder thick with papers. She had been tracking my purchases like a detective building a case. "Look at this pattern of wasteful spending," she announced, spreading receipts across the coffee table like evidence of wrongdoing. $500 on a handbag when you have dozens already. $1,200 on a spa day when there are perfectly good nail salons nearby. $300 on skincare products when drugstore brands work just as well. She continued building her case. "This money belongs to the family legacy, not your personal whims and vanity purchases." Margaret, who had always been jealous of our financial success, added her voice. "Eleanor, your husband worked far too hard building that business for you to throw it away on frivolous luxury items." Patricia chimed in with false sympathy. "At our age, shouldn't we be thinking about what we're leaving behind rather than what we're spending on ourselves?" The most devastating moment came when Jessica delivered what she clearly considered her knockout argument. "If this reckless spending continues, there won't be anything meaningful left for the grandchildren's future. People around Scottsdale are already talking about the wealthy widow who's lost all perspective about money," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. Then came the final, crushing blow. "Mom, we think you need professional help managing your finances. Maybe it's time to consider setting up a trust arrangement with Michael and me as co-trustees to protect you from these impulsive decisions." As I sat there being lectured about my money that Robert and I had earned through decades of hard work and sacrifice, something profound shifted inside me. These people wanted to control every dollar I spent on myself while being perfectly comfortable with the wealth when it benefited them directly. They had no problem accepting family vacations I funded, holiday gifts I purchased, or the inheritance they were already mentally spending. But me enjoying the fruits of my own labor? That was wasteful and irresponsible. I realized with crystal clarity, they wanted me to live like a pauper to preserve what they already considered their inheritance. The cruelest revelation came later that same evening. I had left my purse in Jessica's kitchen, and when I returned to retrieve it, I heard Jessica talking on the phone with someone, presumably a friend. "We had to stage a full intervention tonight," she was saying with satisfaction in her voice. "She's been spending money like a teenager who just got her first credit card. I mean, honestly, at 72 years old, what does she need designer clothes for? She should be focused on her legacy and what she's leaving behind, not shopping like she's still young." Jessica's voice became more conspiratorial. "Between you and me, the sooner we can get some legal control over those accounts, the better it will be for everyone involved. Someone needs to protect that money from her poor judgment." I stood frozen in the hallway, listening to my own family discuss me like I was an incompetent burden whose happiness didn't matter. They were treating my joy as theft, my desires as symptoms of mental decline. The conversation continued with Jessica complaining. She used to be so sensible about money when Robert was alive to guide her decisions. Now she acts like she can just spend whatever she wants without considering the family. We're trying to be patient, but honestly, watching her waste Dad's hard-earned money on jewelry and spa treatments is just heartbreaking for all of us. That night, I drove home through the desert darkness, feeling more alone than I had since Robert's death. My own family was actively working to strip away my autonomy, my dignity, and my right to enjoy the life we had built together. They had successfully convinced me that wanting beautiful things made me selfish, that spending my own money on experiences that brought me joy was somehow betraying Robert's memory and stealing from my grandchildren's future. I had been living in fear of their judgment for months, restricting my own happiness to make them comfortable with their assumed inheritance. I had allowed them to make me feel ashamed for wanting to live beautifully in the golden years Robert and I had worked so hard to secure. The weeks following that devastating intervention became even more suffocating. Jessica began implementing what she called financial check-ins, weekly phone calls where I was expected to report any purchases over $50. "Just so we can help you think through major decisions," she would say with that same fake sweetness that had become so familiar. When I bought a simple blouse for $85, Jessica's response was immediate. "Mom, that seems expensive for something you probably won't wear often. Maybe we should return it and find something more practical?" Michael started showing up unannounced at my house, claiming he was just checking in. But I noticed how his eyes would scan for shopping bags or any evidence of new purchases. "Mom, Jessica mentioned you went to the mall yesterday," he'd say casually. "Find anything necessary?" The word necessary had become their weapon. Nothing I wanted was ever deemed necessary by their standards. Necessary was groceries and utilities. Everything else was frivolous waste of family money. They even began involving the grandchildren in their campaign. During family dinners, Jessica would make comments like, "Kids, Grandma bought another expensive purse this week instead of adding to your college funds." My 8-year-old granddaughter innocently asked me, "Grandma, why do you need so many purses when we need money for school?" I realized they were teaching my own grandchildren to see my happiness as theft from their future. They were poisoning the next generation against me enjoying my own success. The social isolation became systematic. Jessica started declining invitations to events where she thought I might overspend. Charity galas, country club functions, anything that involved the social circles where Robert and I had been respected for our generosity and success. "We think it's better if you avoid tempting situations right now," she explained, as if I were a recovering addict who couldn't be trusted around luxury goods. She even contacted some of my closest friends, expressing concern about my spending and asking them to keep an eye on my behavior when we were together. My friend Caroline later told me, "Eleanor, Jessica called me worried that you might make impulsive purchases when we go shopping together. She asked me to discourage you from buying anything expensive." I was being treated like a child who needed supervision, and the most painful part was that people who cared about me were being recruited into this web of control. The final straw came when I discovered Jessica had contacted my financial advisor without my permission. She had scheduled a meeting to discuss concerning spending patterns, and had requested information about setting up protective measures for my accounts. When I called my advisor, Robert Henderson, he sounded uncomfortable. "Mrs. Johnson, your daughter-in-law is quite concerned about some recent transactions. She's suggesting we implement some spending limits for your protection." "My protection?" I asked, feeling the last of my dignity slipping away. She mentioned concerns about impulse purchases and suggested that maybe family oversight might be appropriate given your recent lifestyle changes. That's when I understood the full scope of their plan. They weren't just trying to control my day-to-day spending. They were working to legally restrict my access to my own money. They wanted to transform me from a financially independent woman into a dependent who needed permission to spend the money my husband and I had earned together. That night, I sat in my beautiful Scottsdale home, surrounded by the evidence of Robert's and my decades of success, feeling more trapped and powerless than I had ever felt in my entire life. I had allowed my family to steal my joy, my confidence, and nearly my financial freedom, all in the name of protecting an inheritance they had decided belonged to them more than it belonged to me. That night, after discovering Jessica had contacted my financial advisor behind my back, I found myself unable to sleep. I wandered into Robert's study, a room I had avoided for months because it held too many memories of our partnership and shared dreams. The moonlight streaming through the windows illuminated the walls lined with photos of our travels together. Paris, Rome, the Greek islands, pictures of us at charity galas wearing beautiful clothes and genuine smiles. Evidence of a life lived with joy, generosity, and appreciation for the success we had built together. I pulled out our wedding album from the bookshelf, something I hadn't touched since the funeral. As I turned the pages, I found a note Robert had written on our 40th anniversary, tucked between photos of our celebration dinner. "My dearest Eleanor," it read in his familiar handwriting, "you are worth every beautiful thing in this world. You have earned every luxury, every moment of joy, every experience that brings light to your eyes. Never let anyone make you feel small or undeserving of the life we've built. Live beautifully, always. Your devoted husband, Robert." Reading those words, I felt something crack open inside my chest, not with pain, but with recognition. I had been betraying Robert's memory by accepting my family's version of what he would have wanted. Robert had never once questioned my purchases, or made me feel guilty for enjoying nice things. He had encouraged my every desire, celebrated my happiness, and insisted that our money existed to enhance our lives, not restrict them. I remembered the last conversation we had before his final hospital stay. He had been weak but determined to share what he called his most important wisdom. "Eleanor, promise me something," he had said, gripping my hand with what little strength he had left. "Promise me you'll never let anyone convince you that you don't deserve to live beautifully. We earned this money together. It belongs to you as much as it ever belonged to me." "But what about the family? What about the inheritance?" I had asked, already feeling the weight of future expectations. Robert's response had been immediate and firm. "The family will receive what they need when the time is right. But while you're alive, that money is yours to use for your happiness. Don't you dare live like a pauper to make other people comfortable." Sitting in his study that night, I realized I had been doing exactly what he had warned me against. I had been living like someone with limited resources while possessing the means to live any life I chose. The phone rang, interrupting my reflection. It was Jessica calling to follow up on what she probably considered her successful intervention with my financial advisor. "Mom, I just wanted you to know that we've scheduled a family meeting with Robert Henderson for next Tuesday. We think it's important to get some professional guidance about managing your finances moving forward." Her presumptuous tone sparked something fierce inside me.
"We've scheduled."
"Jessica, that's my financial advisor. And those are my accounts we'd be discussing." "Well, yes, of course, but as family members who care about your well-being and the preservation of Dad's legacy, we think some oversight would be beneficial for everyone." Beneficial for everyone. Or beneficial for your peace of mind about your inheritance. There was a pause before Jessica responded with forced patience. "Mom, I think you're misunderstanding our intentions. We're just trying to protect you from making decisions you might regret later." "The only decision I regret," I said, feeling years of suppressed frustration rising to the surface, "is allowing you to make me feel guilty for enjoying the life Robert and I worked decades to build." "Mom, you're being emotional. Maybe we should talk about this when you're thinking more clearly." That condescending response was the moment everything crystallized for me. Jessica was dismissing my legitimate anger as emotional instability. She was treating my defense of my own autonomy as evidence that I needed more control, not less. After hanging up, I sat back down with Robert's note and made a decision that felt like stepping out of a fog I hadn't realized was surrounding me. I would stop asking permission to live my own life. This wasn't rebellion or spite. This was reclaiming my right to enjoy what Robert and I had spent our entire adult lives building together. I didn't owe anyone an explanation for how I spent my money. And I certainly didn't owe them my misery to ensure their comfort about their future inheritance. The next morning, I called Robert Henderson and canceled the family meeting Jessica had arranged without my consent. "Mrs. Johnson, your daughter-in-law seemed very concerned about some recent spending patterns," he said carefully. "Robert," I replied, using the familiarity we developed over years of working together. "I'm 72 years old. I have over $15 million in assets, and I've been successfully managing money since before Jessica was born. If I want to buy a diamond necklace or take a luxury vacation, that's my choice to make." "Of course, Mrs. Johnson." I was simply responding to what seemed like family concern. The family's concern is noted and dismissed. My accounts are my business, and I don't want any information shared with anyone without my explicit written permission. Is that understood? "Absolutely. Consider it handled." That conversation felt like the first step toward reclaiming my power. But I knew I needed to do more than just protect my accounts. I needed to demonstrate to myself and my family that I was no longer going to live in fear of their judgment. I decided my first act of liberation would be purchasing that Cartier necklace I had been admiring for months, not because I desperately needed another piece of jewelry, but because I wanted it, and in a free life, wanting something beautiful is reason enough to have it. This purchase would be different from the guilty, secretive buying I had been doing. I would go to Cartier, openly, proudly, without shame or justification. I would buy something expensive and beautiful because it brought me joy, and I would not apologize for that joy to anyone. I spent the weekend planning this symbolic act of independence. I would wear my favorite dress, a designer piece I hadn't worn in months, because Jessica had made comments about it being too young for someone my age. I would style my hair at the salon I used to frequent before the family convinced me it was unnecessary expense. For the first time in months, I felt excited instead of guilty about spending money on myself. I realized how much I had been depriving myself of simple pleasures to avoid their disapproval. I thought about all the experiences I had missed, all the beautiful things I had denied myself, all the joy I had sacrificed on the altar of their comfort. I had been living a diminished life to make other people feel secure about money that was never theirs to begin with. That Sunday evening I called my sister Helen in California, someone who had known Robert and me during our struggling early years, and had watched us build our success together. "Helen, I need to tell you something that's been happening with the family." I explained the months of manipulation, the guilt tactics, the attempted financial control. Helen listened with growing anger. "Eleanor, this is elder abuse. They're using emotional manipulation to control your access to your own money. I know that now, but I let it happen because I thought they were looking out for my best interests. Robert would be furious if he knew they were making you live like you couldn't afford the life he worked so hard to give you." Helen's validation meant everything to me. Someone who had known us as a couple understood that my family's version of what Robert would have wanted was completely false. "Tomorrow I'm going to Cartier to buy that necklace I've been wanting. And if Jessica has a problem with that, she can adjust her expectations about controlling my choices." "Good for you," Helen said firmly. "It's about time you remembered who you are. A successful, intelligent woman who has every right to enjoy her own money." That night, I slept better than I had in months. I dreamed about Robert. And in the dream, he was smiling and telling me he was proud that I was finally ready to live beautifully again. When I woke up on Monday morning, I felt different, lighter, more like the confident woman I had been before grief made me vulnerable to other people's control. I was 72 years old with substantial wealth and decades of experience, making sound financial decisions. I didn't need permission from anyone to spend my own money on things that brought me happiness. The family had learned to expect a diminished, apologetic Eleanor, who justified every purchase and lived in fear of their judgment. Tomorrow, they were going to meet the real Eleanor C., the woman who had helped build our success and who deserved to enjoy every penny of it. I was done living small to make other people comfortable. I was done asking permission to enjoy my own life. I was done letting anyone make me feel guilty for wanting beautiful things. It was time to live beautifully again, just as Robert had always wanted me to do. Tuesday morning arrived with the brilliant Arizona sunshine that Robert had always loved. I dressed carefully in my favorite designer outfit, the one Jessica had criticized as too young for my age, and styled my hair at the salon I had abandoned months earlier to appease their budget concerns. "Mrs. Johnson," exclaimed Maria, my longtime stylist, "I've missed you so much. Where have you been?" "I've been living someone else's version of my life," I replied honestly, "but that ends today." The drive to Cartier felt like a journey toward freedom. Every mile between my house and the boutique was a step away from the guilt-ridden woman I had become, and toward the confident woman I was reclaiming. So there I was, holding that stunning diamond necklace, when Jessica walked through the door with the shock and panic I described earlier. But let me tell you about the rest of that transformative conversation. "Mom, what are you doing here? You haven't shopped anywhere like this in months," Jessica said, her voice rising with each word. I looked at her calmly, feeling the strength of my decision flowing through me. "This is exactly where I belong, Jessica. This is who I've always been underneath the guilt trips you've been laying on me. I'm not asking permission to enjoy my own life anymore." Jessica's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, then desperate calculation as she realized she was losing control. "But Mom, what about the family? What about preserving Dad's legacy? What about being responsible with the inheritance?" I smiled, feeling Robert's presence with me as I delivered the response I should have given months earlier. "Jessica, my husband's legacy was building a life where I could live beautifully. I'm finally honoring his real wishes, not the version you've created to control my choices. And as for the inheritance, I'll decide what happens to my money when I'm ready. Right now, I'm deciding to spend it on my happiness." The sales associate, sensing the tension but maintaining her professionalism, quietly asked, "Shall I complete the purchase, Mrs. Johnson?" Without breaking eye contact with Jessica, I handed over my credit card. "Absolutely. And I'll be wearing it out today." Jessica watched in stunned silence as I completed the transaction without hesitation, apology, or justification. The woman who had been asking permission to spend $50 was confidently purchasing a necklace worth more than most people's cars. "This is insane. You just spent $50,000 on a necklace." Jessica finally exploded. "Think about what good that money could do for the grandchildren's college funds. Think about the practical things the family needs." I allowed the sales associate to clasp the necklace around my neck, feeling its weight as a symbol of my reclaimed power. "Jessica, I've been thinking about everyone else's needs for 72 years. Today, I thought about mine. And you know what? It feels wonderful." Jessica made one more desperate attempt to regain control. "Mom, this isn't like you. You're not thinking clearly. Maybe we should call Dr. Martinez and discuss whether this kind of impulsive behavior is normal." That's when I realized she was actually suggesting I needed medical intervention for the crime of enjoying my own money. The audacity was breathtaking. "The only thing that wasn't normal," I replied evenly, "was allowing my family to make me feel guilty for living the life Robert and I earned together." I gathered my purse and turned toward the door. "I'm having lunch at the Four Seasons. Then I'm booking a trip to Italy, something Robert and I always plan to do together. You're welcome to join my celebration of independence. Or you can continue being angry that I refuse to live like a pauper." The weeks that followed were the most liberating of my life. I embraced my new philosophy of guilt-free living with the enthusiasm of someone making up for lost time. I booked that first-class trip to Italy, staying in the luxury hotels Robert and I had researched together. I hired a personal shopper to help me update my entire wardrobe with clothes that made me feel confident and beautiful. I joined the exclusive country club where Robert and I had been members, but which I had stopped visiting because Jessica thought the membership fees were excessive for someone your age. I started taking art classes, pottery lessons, and wine appreciation courses, all the enriching experiences I had denied myself while living under family surveillance. The family's attempts to regain control became increasingly desperate and transparent. Michael called repeatedly. "Mom, Jessica says you're making a lot of major decisions very quickly. Maybe we should sit down and talk about this rationally." "Son," I replied during one of these calls, "I'm making my own decisions for the first time in months. This is what rational looks like when it's not filtered through your wife's control issues." They tried staging another intervention, but I simply didn't attend. "I'm not available for meetings where people discuss my money as if it belongs to them," I told Michael when he called to complain about my absence. Jessica attempted to rally other family members to their cause, calling my sister-in-law Margaret and various cousins to express concern about my erratic behavior. But something interesting happened. Instead of the support she expected, many of these family members actually admired my newfound independence. My cousin Patricia told me later, "Eleanor, I wish I had your courage. I've been letting my kids guilt me about my spending for years, and seeing you stand up for yourself inspired me to set some boundaries of my own." The social reaction in Scottsdale was equally surprising. Instead of the judgment Jessica had predicted, I found admiration and support from women my age who understood exactly what I had been through. "Good for you," said my neighbor Martha, when she saw me wearing the Cartier necklace at the country club. "Life's too short to live for other people's approval, especially when it's your own money." My friend Caroline, who had been recruited into Jessica's monitoring network, apologized profusely. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry I let her convince me you needed supervision. I should have recognized manipulation when I saw it." Word spread quickly through our social circles that Eleanor Johnson was living it up again. But instead of criticism, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Other wealthy women began sharing their own stories of family pressure and financial guilt. I discovered I wasn't alone in experiencing this type of inheritance-focused manipulation. 6 months after the Cartier incident, I had transformed my entire lifestyle. I was traveling regularly, had made new friends who celebrated my joy instead of policing my spending, and had rediscovered the confidence that had made Robert fall in love with me decades earlier. The family gradually realized that their guilt tactics no longer had any power over me. Jessica's attempts to shame me about purchases bounced off me like rain off glass. When she criticized my decision to renovate my kitchen with top-of-the-line appliances, I simply replied, "I'm creating a space that brings me joy in the home Robert and I shared. Your opinion about my choices is noted and dismissed." Jessica made one final, desperate attempt to control me during a family dinner at Christmas. "Mom, if you keep spending at this rate, you'll have nothing left to leave us when you're gone." I looked around the table at Michael, Jessica, and my grandchildren, and delivered what I now consider my declaration of independence. "Jessica, that's the most honest thing you've said in months. You're not concerned about my happiness or my financial security. You're worried about your inheritance. Let me be crystal clear. This money was never yours to begin with. Robert and I earned it together. And I'll spend it however brings me the most joy. If that means there's less left when I die, then you'll adjust your expectations accordingly. I'm 72 years old with substantial wealth, and I plan to enjoy every penny while I'm alive to appreciate it." The room fell silent. Even the grandchildren seemed to understand that Grandma had just established some very clear boundaries. Michael tried one weak attempt. "Mom, we just want what's best for you." "What's best for me," I replied firmly, "is living without guilt about spending my own money on things that make me happy. What's best for me is not having to justify every choice to people who benefit from my generosity, but resent my joy." Today, nearly 2 years after that liberation moment at Cartier, I live exactly the life Robert always wanted me to have. I travel first class to destinations we dreamed about visiting together. I buy beautiful clothes that make me feel confident and elegant. I wear expensive jewelry because it brings me pleasure, not because I need to prove anything to anyone. My relationship with my family has found a new equilibrium. They learned they cannot manipulate a woman who refuses to feel guilty about her own happiness. Michael has become more respectful of my independence, and while Jessica still occasionally makes snide comments about my spending sprees, they no longer affect me. I've also made some strategic changes to my estate planning. Nothing vengeful, but simply ensuring that my generosity during my lifetime is appropriately recognized in my will. Most importantly, I sleep peacefully every night knowing I'm living authentically for the first time since Robert's death. To any woman listening who has been made to feel guilty about enjoying her own success, you don't owe anyone your misery. You don't need permission to spend money you've earned. Your happiness matters just as much as anyone else's financial expectations. It's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to live beautifully. I'm 72 years old. I have the means to live any life I choose, and I plan to enjoy every moment of the freedom Robert and I worked so hard to secure. That beautiful diamond necklace? I wear it every day as a reminder that I choose joy over guilt, freedom over control, and authentic living over other people's comfort. Because at the end of the day, this is my life, my money, and my choice to live beautifully, exactly as my beloved husband always wanted me to do. So, that's my story. I'd love to hear what you think. Have you ever had family members try to control how you spend your own money? Let me know in the comments, and subscribe if you want to hear more stories like mine.